Hey everybody, Mr. The Fanboy here, back for another video, and this is a video I've been meaning to do this past week, or ever since the Ronda Rousey Helms, I think that's her name, Helms, I keep forgetting her name, but the woman Ronda Rousey lost to. Since that fight, I've been meaning to do this video, but I never got around to doing it. I never got around to doing it. And that is professional wrestling versus MMA. Also, I've also been meaning to do this video for a long time because I've been annoyed by the MMA fans who bash professional wrestling and think they're like better than professional wrestling fans because they watch real fighting, because they watch real fighting. So I've been meaning to do this video for a long time, but I never got around to doing it. This right here is my pro wrestling versus MMA video. Like I said, one thing I'm sick of is MMA fans, because they watch MMA, realistic fighting. They think they're better. They think they're better than professional wrestling fans, and and they diss other forms of martial arts. They diss other forms of martial arts and try to claim MMA as real martial arts. Now, while MMA by default is martial arts because it's self defense, it's also used as self defense. So while they are by default martial arts, by default martial arts, um MMA is more closer to professional wrestling than it is martial arts. So all people who are like, "Oh, you watch that fake professional wrestling crap," well, MMA is pretty much the same thing. You want real martial arts? Go to kickboxing, karate, even boxing in its purest form. Boxing in its purest form, not the sport, but boxing, the fighting style in its purest form is a martial art. And any ancient form, any ancient martial arts. These are martial arts. Like I said, kickboxing, Muay Thai, Taekwondo, karate, and boxing in its purest form, Kung Fu. All of these are pretty much martial arts, and any other like ancient hybrid style like Tang Sun Do, Hakpido, um, Kimpo, What's that other style called? Krav Maga, the self defense style. These are these are by default. These are real martial arts. MMA. While there are some real martial artists like Marco Ruas, um, the Rua brothers, Murillo and Mauricio Rua, um, pretty much fighters who, of course, are fighters from the Shootbox Academy. Fighters from the Shootbox Academy. Chuck Liddell, Lyoto Machida, Lyoto Machida, um, GSP before he was forced to train it all away. GSP, in his early days, he was forced to train. He was forced to train all of that martial arts away. His karate, he was forced to train that away and become a generic MMA fighter. A generic, boring, lay and pray MMA fighter. Um, um, Mirko Krokop, Fedor Emelianenko, and Matt Hume, Jason DeLucia, Eric Paulson, pretty much and Bass Rutten. These guys were like quote unquote real real martial artists in MMA. In MMA, most MMA fighters are grapplers, jujitsu, or wrestlers straight out of high school. wrestlers straight out of high school who go to a gym and learn learn striking techniques in a couple of styles, and go to and then go into a fight. And when you go there, when you go there, you see mediocre boxing, mediocre kicking, brawling, and just a bunch of takedowns. Is once again makes it the real form of professional wrestling instead of real legit martial arts. Martial arts. Biggest proof of this is Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar. He's not the only professional wrestler I'm going to mention, but I'm going to start off with Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar, of course, while he does have NCAA experience, he had poor stand-up skills in MMA. He pretty much won with his grappling. His stand-up was terrible. And yet he was able to become a heavyweight. He was able to become the UFC heavyweight champion. And I agree with boxer Tyson Fury, who did a video. Who he's the heavyweight champion of the world right now. Just recently defeated Vladimir Klitschko yesterday, and earlier this year he did a video called Tyson Fury Rips UFC. Tyson Fury Rips UFC, where he said he could crush any UFC heavyweight. He can beat Cain Velasquez. And he ripped UFC for having Brock Lesnar, a quote unquote pretend fighter, come in and win the UFC heavyweight championship. He says that if a pretend fighter, and I partially agree with him, if a pretend fighter can come in and win your heavyweight championship and what is supposed to be the ultimate fighting championship, it doesn't say much about your organization. You're not credible. If a pretend fighter can come in and do that, then look at the people Brock Lesnar's face. The first guy, of course, was Frank Mir. He destroyed Frank Mir. Frank Mir barely won with the when he caught him with the submission hold, but he destroyed him with superior wrestling. The next guy. Now right here, he should have lost. He would later come back to avenge that loss against Frank Mir. The next guy he fought was Heath Herring. Now this guy right here should have smashed Brock Lesnar. This fight right here is actually suspect. This guy should have smashed Brock Lesnar. Heath Herring is a Sambo expert and has excellent stand up. Okay, in MMA, Sambo is much better than um um amateur wrestling, because in MMA there are no pins. In Sambo is takedowns and submissions. Then of course there's a full contact version of Sambo called with striking called combat Sambo, which is what Fedor and Malenko practices, which is pretty much Russian MMA. Except Russian MMA actually looks like real martial arts, and not just a brawl, which that's another thing MMA is. It's a mainstream MMA. It's a mainstream street fight. It's a mainstream organized street fight. Little to do with actual martial arts. A mainstream street fight. That MMA is pretty much how a street fight would look, with rules, regulations, and athletic commissions and everything. That's what MMA is. Yeah, you had Brock Lesnar. And Brock Lesnar beat Heath Herring, who Heath Herring should have destroyed him. His stand up is better than Lesnar's, and his grappling art Sambo is better than Brock Lesnar's grappling art wrestling. Next is then of course he beat Randy Couture. Then of course he beat Randy Couture to get the heavyweight championship. Then he later lost to Cain Velasquez and Overeem, and it retired from MMA because of an illness. But But the point is, Brock Lesnar should have never won the belt. Should never won the belt. If this was kickboxing or boxing, Brock Lesnar would have been destroyed. Tyson Fury, Klitschko, David Hay, David Hay would have knocked the living crap out of or any top boxer today would have knocked the living would have knocked the living crap out of Brock Lesnar. Would have knocked the living crap out of Brock Lesnar. Same in kickboxing. Tyrone Sprung, Rico Van Hooven, and any top heavyweight kickboxer today would knock the crap out of Brock Lesnar. I think even some smaller fighters can knock the crap out of Brock Lesnar, can beat the crap out of Brock Lesnar. Because that's not his style. He is not a stand-up fighter. Same, and he would also lose in also like also like full contact full contact and minimal contact karate, Kyokushin karate, and of course point karate. If you would put him in either one of those, he would get knocked out because he's not a stand-up fighter. He would get knocked out. Pretty much any stand-up or Lesnar would get the crap beat out of him. Lesnar would get the crap beat out of him. So the fact that Brock Lesnar, a wrestler, succeeded in MMA shows that MMA is not anymore that more real or even different than professional wrestling. The only difference between the two is one is real and one is worked. One is worked. They both pretty much go through the same training, even though their training is a little bit different. Um, wrestlers mostly go to the gym. Rarely ever do they work on technique unless they're trying to be a better worker in the ring. Unless they're trying to be a better worker in the ring or forced to become a better worker in the ring if they still got out of wrestling school and still suck. Um, MMA fighters, MMA fighters, MMA fighters, they go to different gyms and they train pretty much for months because they're actually aiming to win a fight, whereas wrestlers are wrestling to pretty much entertain for the crowd. Are pretty much to entertain for the crowd. Whereas MMA fighters, they do that, but they also have to win. They also have to win. They're also going for the win. So that's the difference between their training. But it's fundamentally the same. They both go to a gym. Wrestlers learn to strike, grapple, and professional wrestling in its purest form is catch as can wrestling, which is wrestling in its purest, unrestricted, no holds barred form. And of course, I mentioned if you know the history of professional wrestling, they later started scripting outcomes, and added fighting, added punching and striking and weapons to wrestling to make the fights more interesting. Because before that, they were long grappling contests, which after seeing a lot of it would get boring. So yes, they go to the gym, they learn striking, they learn striking, grappling, they learn striking, grappling, and bumping, and bumping, and bumping and bumping. So it's pretty much the same thing. And then another reason they're the same is when you look at the MMA fighters. Another problem I have with MMA fighters. This is mostly with the UFC. The fighters do not. The top fighters who are usually the top guys, they do not conduct themselves like martial artists. They act like annoying high school jocks and professional wrestlers where they talk trash, where they talk a lot of trash and do all sorts of antics to get people to pay money for their fights, which is the same thing a professional wrestler does. Professional wrestlers, they talk people into the arena with their larger than life charisma and personas and stuff, and that's what top MMA fighters like Chael Sonnen, Tito Ortiz of the past, Tank Abbott, and Ronda Rousey and John Jones did, and then Quentin Rampage. This is how they got popular. This is how they got popular. It wasn't so much skill. It was their mouth. It was their mouth and all the crazy antics they were doing. I hate that because it makes martial arts. It makes martial arts look bad. It makes look MMA, which is supposed to be legit, looks like some crappy WWE garbage. WWE garbage, which is a problem I had with the UFC, is that while MMA, like I said, is more closer to professional wrestling, so you see smaller MMA organizations like Bellator, World Series of Fighting, the One Championship organization in Japan, which have more, which their product is more towards is more like a martial, has more of a martial arts feel, whereas you got MMA, which is when you got UFC, which is more similar to boxing, boxing, NFL, NFL, NBA, and professional wrestling. And yeah, Dana wants nothing to do with professional wrestling, yet he uses several professional wrestling business practices, such as monopolizing the business, monopolizing the UFC. The fighters can't fight anywhere else. They have to be exclusively for the UFC when they sign a contract. The top fighters in UFC are all in commercials, are all in commercials, and pretty much disrespect and talk trash to their opponents to hype up their fights, So so professional wrestling and MMA are like one of the same. Now let's go back to more about professional wrestling. Then of course Brock Lesnar is the first popular wrestler to do it. Let's talk about CM Punk. This right here probably has to be the worst one because unlike Lesnar, who had an amateur wrestling background, CM Punk is only mentioned being trained. He's he says I think he's been trained in Muay Thai, Kempo, Karate, and Jiu-Jitsu. Yet he's never like sparred. He's never fought like in a contest. He's never fought in a real legitimate contest, in a real legitimate fight first, in a real legitimate contest, and then let's talk about his martial arts work in the ring. In the ring, CM Punk. CM Punk. He has the psychology. He has the storytelling and the psychology, but most of his moves look sloppy. He wrestles and fights like some brawler, which is what he is. He he ripped off Kenta's and Samoa Joe's fighting style when he came to WWE to have a shoot fighting type fighting style. But before that, he was a stereotypical hardcore. He was a stereotypical brawler type wrestler, just like Raven. He knew some catches can mat wrestling, but he was mostly just a brawler like Raven, doing lots of spot. He had psychology and technical wrestling, but he was mostly doing a bunch of spots, a bunch of hardcore brutal spots and brawling. That's what CM Punk was. His finisher. He did the GTS. He did the GTS and the combinations and the Vice from Kenta and Samoa Joe. Before that, his finisher was a pedigree off the top rope. Was a pedigree off the top rope. So CM Punk has never fought legitimate in his life. Then he's supposed to be a legitimate martial artist. Yet in the ring, I don't see that. He fights like a backyard brawler, a backyard wrestler, a backyard wrestler. That's what he fights like. He was a backyard wrestler before he went to the Steel Domain and got the training from Ace Steel to become a real professional wrestler. Yet Dana White approached him and said, CM Punk, I want you to fight in the UFC. I want you to fight in the UFC. And even CM Punk said so. And people want to say, well, people want to talk about other fighters like Tank Abbott and Ken Shamrock. I'm going to rip those apart right now. Tank Abbott, much to people's surprise, his street fighting and barroom brawling, that's part of his persona. His fighting style actually consists of, he was a wrestler, brawling, and he has training in boxing. That's why Tank Abbott got as far as he did. Tank Abbott was pretty much like probably the best fighter in the world up until the Zuffa era of the UFC, where fighters became more well-rounded. But before that, he was probably one of the best. The only fighters I could think that could have beat him back then were Shamrock, Chemo, Marco Ruiz, Keith Hackney, and Gary Goobridge, and pretty much those guys are fighters I think, and are the only fighters I think that could have beat Tank Abbott. That could have beat Tank Abbott, but he mauled through everyone up into the Zuffa era where he got destroyed by Vitor Belfort. By Vitor Belfort, where he got destroyed by Vitor Belfort. But so Tank Abbott, he became a professional wrestler in 2000 with WCW, but he started off as a brawler, with training in boxing, and he wrestled in high school and college. He was legit. Tank Abbott was legit. Shamrock, of course, um he got into professional wrestling. He started as a normal professional wrestler. Then he traveled to Japan where he learned the shoot style of professional wrestling, which of course consists of open palm strikes, technical wrestling, and martial art style kicks. This was the early form of MMA in Japan. They later put gloves on the fighters and made it bare knuckle. However, bare knuckle punches were allowed to the body, but not the head. They later put gloves on and made it bare knuckle, and that's how Pride was born. Of course, Sharon, he started off with the first organization, the UWF, the Nobuhiko Takeda. This organization, of course, as everyone knows, was about creating realistic-looking professional wrestling bouts. But of course, like all professional wrestling outcomes, they were worked. The several fighters later split from the UWF, and Masato Funaki later created the Pancrase. We are hybrid wrestling organizations. This organization right here was pretty much the first real professional wrestling organization, because this had real wrestling competition, real fighting competition, and this is where Shamrock owned his skills. This is where Shamrock, Bas Rutten, and Maurice Smith, who would all later win the UFC Heavyweight Championship, this is where they started and owned their skills. Frank Shamrock, Guy Mexer, and other fighters like Matt Hughes, Jason DeLucia started here too. This is where they started. This is where they started, and then they came back to the UFC. And Shamrock was one of the early pioneers, being well versed in striking and grappling, Um, so Shamrock. Then of course you got Kazushi Sakuraba, who was of course another known shoot fighter, who they call the IQ wrestler, and of course the Gracie Hunter, who Kazushi Sakuraba, he discredited the jiu-jitsu myth that Brazilian jiu-jitsu couldn't be beat. And of course, he beat them with wrestling, catch as can wrestling. That's professional wrestling in its purest form. He beat Gracie's. He even beat Royce Gracie at his own game in a 90-minute MMA fight with in a 90-minute MMA fight at his own game. And he went the distance with fighters like Vanderlei Silva, and Mirko Cro Cop and his group Kingdom, this was another shoot fighting professional wrestling organization. His group had a presence at the UFC Japan event where Kazushi Sakuraba won the event. If you can watch one of the fights here on YouTube. I watched one of the fights here on YouTube. The announcer, they call him a submission wrestler, which is the other term for catch wrestler. They called him a submission wrestler, so no one to hide the fact that he was a professional wrestler, because a professional wrestler was there winning your supposedly real Ultimate Fighting Championship. It wouldn't say much about your organization, so they had to refer to him as a submission wrestler. So, and let's talk about other professional wrestlers. You got Kid Cash. He was a professional wrestler in ECW, TNA, WWE, TNA, and now he's back on the independents. This guy's mostly been underground his career, but this guy was mostly a brawler and a high flyer, Kid Cash. Yet he lost his MMA fight, but he lost due to point deduction. He was beating his opponent, but he did something illegal and got a point deduction. The other guy managed to beat him on a decision. But once again, now even though he lost, according to the logic of an MMA fan, a professional wrestler, in what is supposed to be a real fight, is not supposed to get past the first round. It's supposed to be a couple of punches. It's over. It's over. Yet Kid Cash had the match won, but did something stupid and had his points deducted and lost the fight. Then you got what else? What else? What else? What else? Oh yeah. Then then there was a fighter, there was a wrestler who in Ring of Honor, in the Ring of Honor, an underground professional wrestling company. There was a wrestler named Xavier. He fought in MMA as John Xavier. As John Xavier. This guy he competed in 3 fights in amateur MMA and won each of them. Once again, this guy has no previous amateur experience. Yet was immediately able to come from professional wrestling and win a fight. Let's get to one of the worst ones. And that's Dave Batista. Not only was this guy old, he had really no real amateur experience. He was mostly just a bodybuilder. Yet, even though the real fight he was supposed to fight, the real guy he was supposed to fight, something happened to him and they got this replacement fighter, and Batista destroyed him. Once again. Batista, he's mostly a bodybuilder. He has no real amateur experience, and he was a terrible wrestler in WWE. He was mostly big, had the look and charisma, and he wasn't that charismatic either. He's actually Batista. In my opinion, he's much better as an actor than he was as a professional wrestler. But Batista, he had the look, and he had the but he didn't have no skills, and yet he won his MMA fight. Brock Lesnar, and the next one I'm about to get to, Bobby Lashley, and them, they had amateur experience. Bobby Lashley's had 16 fights and has only lost two of them. He's 14 and 2. Has only lost two of them. So once again, a professional wrestler has a MMA as a record as a total of 16 fights and with 14 wins, with 14 wins, with his most recent one being by knockout. So once again, an MMA fighter, a professional wrestler, once again comes in and dominates in MMA, in which once again MMA in professional wrestling is supposed to be fake, and and professional wrestling is supposed to be fake, pretend. MMA is supposed to be real. Yet you have once again pretend wrestlers, pretend fighters coming in and winning real fights. If MMA was as real as it's supposed to be, we wouldn't see guys like CM Punk in the UFC. Brock Lesnar, we would not have seen him in the UFC, and he would not have been champion. And these guys ain't supposed to get past the first fight. Yet, not only do they get past the first fight, they win and they dominate and they win belts and stuff. So, like I said, in boxing and kickboxing, this would not happen. Then you got and other fighters. These were professional wrestlers, other people. You got Ray Mercer, a 50-year-old man, a 50-something-year-old man, a couple of years ago, beating Tim Sylvia for the King of the, I keep forgetting, what show did he beat Tim Sylvia? It was either a Strike Force show or the King of the Cage show. I can't remember. But he beat Tim Sylvia. Who was UFC heavyweight champion in the late 90s, in the mid 2000s in the UFC. He beat Tim Sylvia. Herschel Walker, a 47-year-old football player, was successful in his MMA debut. Even though he had previous martial arts training, but he was a 40-something-year-old man. Kimbo Slice. This is once again proves MMA is once again more of a mainstream street fight. Kimbo Slice got popular fighting in underground street fights. Underground street fights, and none of these guys and all his fighters were bums. The only tough fight he fought was the fighting. I think his name was Sean Gannon. He was a police officer. He's now a police officer, but he fought in one of the early UFC events. This was the only tough one because this one lasted 10 minutes, but all the others lasted a couple of seconds. And this guy, once again, Dana White said this guy would never be in the UFC. Couple of years later, 2 years later, he's in the UFC. Kimbo Slice is in the UFC. Kimbo Slice in the UFC, which just shows you that it's a business. And once again, it's not that more real than professional wrestling and various underground wrestlers. Like there's an underground wrestler I like who calls himself Slim J, who has a hip hop rapper gimmick. He incorporates MMA into his professional wrestling style, and he actually competes in real MMA. I have another fighter. He wrestles here in Georgia for what was most recently Anarchy Wrestling. Now it's called While We Wrestle. Another fighter from that building who also participates in MMA is Anthony Henry. Is Anthony Henry. Anthony Henry. Once again, this is another professional wrestler. This is another professional wrestler who once again is competing in MMA. And according to him, I have not really seen any of his MMA fights, but I'm friends with him on Facebook. He tells me he wins at MMA. So, you have all these guys who are supposed to be pretend fighters, pretend fighters, and fighters from somewhere else. Fighters from somewhere else are old people waiting in what is supposed to be the ultimate fighting world, the ultimate fighting competition. So once again, MMA fans, get off your high horse. You're not better than professional wrestling or a fan of anything because you supposedly watch real quote unquote fighting. I'm a casual goer of MMA. My favorite combat sports are boxing and of course professional wrestling. Wrestling. I like professional wrestling. It's more entertaining, much more exciting fights, and even though it's worked, it's catch as can wrestling, grappling in its purest form. One thing I can't stand about MMA. Another thing, when people say, "Oh, wrestling is gay," MMA features two guys in shorts and tights, tights, mostly on the floor. Not every fight is like this, but mostly on the floor, dry humping each other, and they take each other down and they stay there for the entire fight. And yeah, you want to call wrestling gay or something like that, where you have guys in tights and shorts and tights on top of each other, no shirts on, grappling with each other. No, yeah, it's jujitsu, grappling, sambo, judo. That's what that is. But to the casual goer who pays to see a fist fight. And another thing, a lot of them, since they're grapplers, they really can't fight, so they take them down and go to the ground and fight. They go to the ground and fight. That was the case with Ronda Rousey. She got her butt kicked by a boxer. And a superior striker. Striker. So this right here was pretty much my pro wrestling versus MMA video, because like I said, I got sick of all the MMA fans bashing professional wrestling, and thinking they're better than wrestling fans because they watch real fighting. So that was right there. That was a little contrast and comparison to professional wrestling and MMA, and a short burial of MMA as a whole. All right, dug out.